What if a tiny peninsula, squeezed between two colossal East Asian powers, had never existed? What if the fragile balance that shaped an entire people's fate had tipped just once? How does a nation, born from myth and survival, struggle through millennia to preserve its identity under the looming shadows of empires? And what happens when that nation, forged by a shared history, suddenly splits into two worlds, divided not only by borders, but by visions of the future? These questions haunt the story we are about to unravel. Friends, be sure to subscribe to my Quiet History channel, like it, and leave a comment of at least 7 words. This is necessary for the channel to function. Share this video with others if you think it's important. Thank you. The Korean Peninsula, a narrow strip of land jutting out from the vast Asian continent, stretching like a hand toward the Japanese islands across the Blue Sea. Covering just under 200,000 square kilometers, it is a land where mountains claim 70% of the terrain. Life is squeezed into thin valleys and coastal plains, a natural fortress carved by soaring peaks and surrounded by water on 3 sides. But this fortress was also a gateway, a crossroads of trade, culture, and conflict, caught between giants for centuries. Long before the first kingdoms rose, hunter-gatherer tribes roamed these rugged lands. Archaeologists have uncovered their stone tools, coarse pottery, and cave paintings, silent echoes of lives spent wrestling with the relentless wilderness. Survival was a constant battle, and these early people laid the groundwork for what would become a rich and enduring culture. Yet, the peninsula had no name, no unity, only scattered tribes speaking related tongues, shaped by the pull of neighboring powers, the colossal Chinese civilization to the west, and the fierce peoples of Manchuria and Siberia to the north. Among the swirling mists of legend and reality, Koreans trace their origins to the demigod Tangun, said to be born in 2333 BCE. The son of a heavenly deity and a bear, transformed into a woman after a 21-day fast in a cave, Tangun founded the first Korean state, Gojoseon. Historians dismiss this as myth, yet the story reveals something deeper, a profound self-awareness, a divine connection to nature, and the roots of a national identity forged in the crucible of faith and story. But beyond myth lies fact. The first reliable records of organized states on the peninsula date to the first millennium BCE. Here, the shadow of China loomed large, an ever-present force, alternately protector and predator, cultural beacon and existential threat. In the 7th century BCE, archaeological finds place a state called Joseon in what is now North Korea and Manchuria. This Joseon, distinct from the later dynasty of the same name, thrived on agriculture and livestock, its people struggling to carve a life amidst turbulent times. For centuries, the peninsula remained the stage for fateful decisions, alliances made and broken, cultural ties forged or severed, identities challenged by the demands of survival. Why did this land, home to one of the world's most sophisticated alphabets, long hold the foreign tongue as the language of prestige? What forces pushed a once unified kingdom into opposing realms, divided by ideology, history, and hope? The story of Korea is not just a tale of geography or conquest. It is a relentless saga of human fear and ambition, of choices that ripple through centuries, shaping destinies that no one could have foretold. From ancient tribes to modern nations, from the shadows of empires to the bright blaze of cultural and technological renaissance, this is the story of survival, division, and the enduring quest for identity. As we journey through 3,000 years, from myths of semi-divine founders to the stark realities of a divided peninsula, one truth becomes clear. History is shaped by decisions made under pressure, by moments when survival demanded sacrifice, and by the irreversible paths carved by those who dared to choose. Subscribe to Quiet History for more stories that reveal how our world was forged in the fires of fate and fear. The journey has only just begun. What happens when a mighty empire decides to impose its will on a distant land? How do ancient peoples react when their fate is suddenly rewritten by foreign powers? And what are the irreversible consequences of such brutal collisions of culture and power? In one of the most dramatic chapters of East Asian history, the Korean Peninsula stood at the crossroads of profound transformation and violent upheaval. For centuries, the early Korean tribes traded with the Chinese, mastering bronze and then beginning to forge iron, an advancement that gave them a striking edge over neighboring clans. But the true turning point came in the year 108 before the Common Era, when the powerful Han Empire from China launched a direct conquest of ancient Chosun. This was no mere border skirmish. It was the first outright invasion of the peninsula by Chinese imperial forces, forever altering the trajectory of Korean civilization. For nearly 4 centuries, the Han established military administrative districts across parts of the Korean Peninsula. These commanderies became beacons of Chinese culture, technology, and governance, an iron grip of power that spread Confucian philosophy, Buddhism, and an intricate system of statecraft. The Korean people were introduced to Chinese script, an immensely complex system for recording their language, marking the birth of a deep and lasting cultural symbiosis. Yet beneath this cultural infusion, a fierce tension simmered, a profound struggle for identity amid dominance. Even after the Han commanderies faded, the Korean elite clung to Chinese cultural models, viewing them as the pinnacle of civilization. But what of those beyond direct Chinese control? To the south, tribal confederations known as the Samhan, comprising Mahan, Jinhan, and Byeonhan, began to take shape. These proto-states lacked fixed borders or centralized authority, yet their emerging social hierarchies and religious institutions hinted at the complex tapestry of future kingdoms. As Chinese influence on the northern peninsula waned, the southern tribes consolidated power. This fragile balance set the stage for one of the most turbulent and defining periods in Korean history, the era of the Three Kingdoms. By the early centuries of the Common Era, 3 major states had crystallized across the peninsula and parts of Manchuria: Goguryeo in the north, Baekje to the southwest, and Silla to the southeast. Each emerged on its own timeline, forged through blood, ambition, and survival. Goguryeo, the largest and most warlike of them all, dominated the northern landscape and extended deep into Manchuria. Founded in the 37th year before the Common Era, though more reliable records date to the 1st century CE, it inherited traits from older regional polities. Here the influence of China lingered strongest. Yet Goguryeo was fiercely independent, a thorn in the side of its colossal neighbor. Its society was militarized, ruled by a warrior aristocracy, where every young man endured brutal training in horseback riding, archery, and hand-to-hand combat. This was a culture forged in the crucible of constant warfare. Visualize a 6th century Goguryeo warrior, clad in iron lamellar armor, the gleam of his conical helmet catching the sun as he sits astride a powerful steed. His sword, crafted in the Chinese style, hangs by his side, and behind him a composite bow made from wood, horn, and sinew, deadly accurate and capable of lethal force even at full gallop. These mounted archers were not just defenders, they were relentless aggressors, their mobility and skill rendering them an unstoppable force on the battlefield. But Goguryeo was not only a kingdom of warriors. Its capitals, first in Kunusan, now modern-day Tonghua in China, and later in Pyongyang, became vibrant centers of art and craftsmanship. Here, the same hands that forged weapons also shaped culture, weaving a complex legacy that would echo throughout Korean history. Yet beneath this flourishing civilization lay the ever-present shadow of war, rivalry, and the brutal realities of survival in a contested world. Every choice made by kings, warriors, and commoners alike carved the future with irrevocable force. The ancient Korean Peninsula stood on the edge of transformation, where the collision of empires and the birth of kingdoms would set into motion centuries of conflict, cultural exchange, and unyielding struggle. What price would be paid for these irreversible decisions? The story of Korea's rise is as much about fear and loss as it is about resilience and power. If you want to delve deeper into these epic tales of human struggle and fate's cruel twists, make sure to subscribe to Quiet History. The past is never silent. It echoes through every choice we make. What drives a kingdom to war? How do decisions made in shadowed halls ripple through centuries? The Korean Peninsula in the era of the Three Kingdoms was a stage for relentless struggle. Goguryeo, Baekje, and Silla locked in a deadly dance of power, alliances, and betrayal. Their leaders faced choices with irreversible consequences, shaping not only their fate, but the destiny of an entire region. The question loomed: who would survive the tides of ambition and war? Goguryeo stood as a fortress in the north, its nobility immortalized by vivid frescoes from ancient tombs, scenes of hunting, feasts, and elite warriors whose training was both grueling and spiritual. These warriors journeyed through mountain wilderness, forging body and soul, meditating beneath waterfalls and crafting poems celebrating nature's beauty. Yet beneath this cultivated exterior, a simmering tension brewed, as their kingdom braced for an unprecedented onslaught. Could their hardened spirit withstand the storm approaching from the south and east? Far to the south, Silla's capital, Gyeongju, was a marvel of the time, a city encircled by imposing fortress walls, dominated by palaces and Buddhist temples. The grand observatory of Chomsongdae, built in the year 634 and still standing today, testified to Silla's advanced scientific knowledge. Yet Silla was far from the dominant force it would soon become. It remained overshadowed by its larger neighbors, quietly plotting its ascent amid the shifting tides of war and diplomacy. How would this once reticent kingdom seize its moment? Between the great kingdoms lay the Confederation of Gaia, 12 city-states nestled in the fertile Nakdong River Valley. Renowned for their ironworking, Gaia's skilled metallurgists supplied weapons and tools across the region, even reaching the shores of Japan. But caught between giants, Gaia's fate was precarious, its independence a fragile flame flickering against the encroaching shadows of Scylla's expanding power. Would their craftsmanship be enough to stave off annihilation, or were they destined to be consumed by the tides of history? The peninsula was a crucible of ceaseless warfare, shifting alliances, and relentless ambition. Koguryo, Baekje, and Silla forged temporary pacts with each other and with foreign powers, Chinese dynasties and Japanese rulers, but these alliances were as unstable as the ground beneath their feet. Periods of brutal conflict gave way to rare moments of peace, where kingdoms turned inward to nurture culture and spirituality. Yet the question remained, would these fragile respites be enough to withstand the relentless march of war? Buddhism, arriving from China like a whisper on the wind, began to weave its profound influence through the peninsula's spiritual life. Koguryo embraced it in the year 372, Baekje followed in 384, but Silla, initially the most resistant, did not officially recognize the new faith until 535. Yet the monks' teachings spread like wildfire, founding monasteries in remote mountains that became centers of learning, medicine, and astronomy. This new faith did not erase old beliefs, but layered over them, creating a complex tapestry of worship and tradition. How long could this fragile balance endure before faith itself became a weapon? The arrival of Buddhism brought not only spiritual change, but also cultural renaissance. Temples rose with their pagodas and statues, colorful murals bringing sacred stories to life. But beneath this blossoming beauty lurked the shadow of conquest. The old shamanistic reverence for nature and ancestors persisted, blending uneasily with Buddhist rituals, reflecting the resilience of Korean identity amid external pressures. Could this intricate spiritual mosaic hold a fractured people together in times of calamity? By the dawn of the 7th century, the balance of power began to shift dramatically. Koguryo, which had long resisted Chinese invasions, faced a formidable new threat: Tang China, unified under Emperor Taizong, who in the year 648 led a massive army into Koguryo territory. Though the invasion ultimately failed, the assault dealt a crippling blow, fracturing the northern kingdom's strength. As Koguryo reeling from this devastation, the southern kingdom of Silla quietly gathered its forces, preparing for a decisive move that would rewrite the peninsula's future. What price would be paid for survival? Under visionary leaders like King Mujio and his successor King Munmu, Silla enacted sweeping reforms, consolidating power and building military might. Their alliance with Tang China against Koguryo and Baekje marked a turning point. United armies crushed their rivals with overwhelming force. In the year 661, the combined Silla-Tang forces dealt a devastating defeat that echoed across the region. But victory came at a cost, and the choices made in these turbulent years would leave scars lasting for centuries. Could Silla harness its newfound power without falling victim to the very ambitions that had toppled its foes? In this crucible of war and faith, culture and conquest, the fate of the Korean Peninsula hung by a thread. The decisions of kings and warriors, monks and artisans, wove a complex tapestry of glory and tragedy, each choice setting in motion forces beyond their control. As the dust settled on battlefield and temple alike, the question remained: could a land torn by conflict ever find peace? Or were these kingdoms doomed to repeat the cycle of ambition and loss? The story of the three kingdoms is a haunting reminder that history is forged not just in grand victories, but in the fragile moments between. Subscribe to Quiet History to witness the untold stories where every decision echoes through time. What happens when a kingdom falls and its last king is forced into exile? King Ouija of Baekje was captured and taken to China, where he died a lonely death far from home. Despite desperate attempts by Baekje loyalists, backed by the Japanese, to rekindle resistance by 663, the kingdom had ceased to exist as an independent power. This was just the beginning of a brutal transformation. What came next would reshape the entire Korean Peninsula. The next target was Goguryeo, a kingdom known for fierce warriors and relentless defense. General Yan Gaesomun led a valiant stand against the overwhelming forces of the Tang dynasty and Shilla allies. Even after his death, his sons carried the torch of resistance. But by 668, the capital Pyongyang fell, signaling the end of an ancient era. The fall of Goguryeo was not just a military defeat. It shattered centuries of autonomy and heralded a new, uncertain future. With both Baekje and Goguryeo vanquished, it seemed China would seize full control of the peninsula, recreating the Han-era dominion. Yet, the victorious Silla revealed a different plan altogether. Having eliminated their rivals, they turned their weapons against their former Chinese allies. Between 671 and 676, Silla's armies relentlessly pushed Tang forces off the peninsula, carving out a unified realm from the fractured lands of the old three kingdoms, except for the northern reaches, which remained under Tang influence, or formed the Bohai Kingdom, born from Goguryeo refugees. This was no mere conquest. It was the dawn of unified Shilla, a golden age that would endure for nearly 3 centuries. But what did unification truly mean? Shilla inherited the legacies of Goguryeo and Baekje, blending their political institutions and cultural achievements into a new synthesis. This synthesis laid the cornerstone for all of Korean civilization, but beneath the surface lurked tensions born from rigid social hierarchies and unyielding traditions. Centralized power under Silla mirrored Chinese bureaucracy in form, but diverged sharply in substance. Unlike China, where theoretically anyone passing state exams could rise to prominence, Silla's bone rank system sealed power within a hereditary aristocracy. Only those of true bone status, the Jingol, could become kings, while the 6 head ranks controlled the highest offices. This rigid caste system ensured stability, but sowed the seeds of internal strife, as talented individuals from lower classes were shut out from leadership, their ambitions crushed by birthright. Economically, unified Shilla thrived on agriculture, with rice cultivated on irrigated lands forming the backbone of society. Peasants toiled under taxing demands, paying tribute in grain and textiles to the state, or aristocracy. Yet beyond the fields, crafts and trade flourished. Shilla's merchants sailed the seas, trading gold, silver, silk, and even women with China and Japan, importing luxury goods, books, and art that enriched the kingdom's cultural tapestry. The wealth flowing through the capital fueled ambitions far beyond mere survival. At the heart of this vibrant kingdom stood Gyeongju, the capital city known then as Gumseong, one of the largest, most affluent cities in the world. Chinese travelers marveled at its dense rooftops, likening them to fish scales, and the fluttering palace and temple flags that waved like clouds in the wind. Archaeological discoveries have confirmed these accounts, revealing grand palace complexes, sprawling temples, artificial lakes, and manicured gardens that speak to remarkable urban sophistication and architectural mastery. Amid this grandeur rose the temple complex of Bulguksa, Temple of the Buddha's Land, constructed in the mid-8th century. This masterpiece of architecture, with its interconnected halls and intricate design, symbolized the power and cultural flowering of unified Silla. Yet behind its beautiful facades lay the fragile balance of a kingdom that had risen from the ashes of war and conquest, forever haunted by the choices that forged it and the conflicts yet to come. How long could such a fragile unity last, when born from bloodshed and rigid hierarchy? Could brilliance and beauty mask the growing fractures beneath? Or would the relentless tides of history demand yet another fateful decision, plunging the peninsula into chaos once more? The story of unified Silla is not simply one of triumph. It is a tale of power's price, the human fear behind irreversible choices, and the shadows cast by every kingdom's fall. Subscribe to Quiet History to uncover more stories where empires rise and fall, where every decision echoes through time, and history's darkest moments reveal the fragile threads that hold civilization together. What happens when a kingdom's foundation begins to crack under the weight of its own social order? In ancient Korea, rigid class hierarchies strangled opportunity. Talented but low-born individuals found doors slammed in their faces, fueling growing unrest. As royal power waned, centrifugal forces spread like wildfire. Provincial lords amassed armies, staking claims to autonomy. The central government's grip loosened, and across the land, rebellion ignited like a powder keg awaiting a spark. One uprising would alter the course of history. The rebellion led by Kion in the year 889 marked the dawn of decades filled with brutal civil wars. In the chaos, two men emerged from obscurity, Kun Yi and Wang Gon. Both rose from humble origins, propelled by sheer military genius and ambition. Kun Yi seized the northern territories and founded a new state, Theban, later renamed Carrion. Wang Gon became his closest ally, their fates intertwined in a volatile alliance forged by conflict. But could loyalty survive ambition's deadly test? Power corrupted Kun Yi beyond recognition. He crowned himself a living Buddha, a god among men. His reign turned into a nightmare of fear, where dissent was met with merciless executions. Paranoia gripped the court. No voice of reason dared to sound. The kingdom descended into terror under his iron fist. Yet, in the shadows, Wang Gon and other trusted comrades plotted a desperate coup. Would they dare to slay a god to save a nation? In the year 918, the unthinkable happened. Kun Yi was assassinated by those closest to him, including Wang Gon. The tyrant's fall left a vacuum filled swiftly by his once trusted aide. Unlike his predecessor's brutal rule, Wang Gon proved a cautious and strategic ruler. He understood that the kingdom's survival depended not on violence, but on shrewd diplomacy and alliances forged through marriage with powerful families. Could wisdom triumph over fear in such turbulent times? By 935, Wang Gon had achieved what many thought impossible. He reunited most of the Korean Peninsula under one banner, birthing the dynasty of Goryeo, the name from which modern Korea is derived. This moment signaled the end of the era of the Three Kingdoms, a brutal chapter scrawled in blood and betrayal. But unification was only the beginning. The legacy of this fragile peace would ripple through centuries, shaping Korea's cultural and political identity. Yet, beneath this veneer of unity, old tensions still simmered, threatening to erupt once more. Goryeo was no mere continuation of the past. It was a bold reinvention. Wang Gon's regime consciously claimed heritage not only from the defeated Shilla, but also from the ancient northern kingdom of Goguryeo, signaling a powerful symbolic continuity. The new capital, Kaegyeong, modern-day Kaesong, rose in the heart of the peninsula, a city meticulously designed according to the cosmic principles of feng shui. Streets aligned with the cardinal points, palaces strategically placed in the northern sector, a physical manifestation of harmony between heaven and earth. But could this delicate balance withstand the ambitions of mortal men? Administrative reforms swept through Goryeo's government. The rigid bone rank system, which had for centuries barred upward mobility, was abolished, at least on paper. A new class of aristocrats emerged, blending Wang Gon's loyal supporters with influential provincial clans. The introduction of state exams, borrowed from China, theoretically opened governance to all free men willing to prove their knowledge of Confucian classics, history, and poetry. Yet, the reality was harsher. Only sons of wealthy families accessed the education necessary to pass these exams, ensuring that power remained concentrated among the elite. Could true meritocracy ever take root in a world ruled by privilege? The lifeblood of Goryeo's economy remained agriculture, deeply rooted in tradition. Rice cultivation thrived in irrigated river valleys and coastal plains, worked by peasants bound to the land. Their labor sustained the realm, yet their voices were barely heard in the halls of power. The social order that oppressed them persisted, a reminder that even as kings rise and fall, the struggles of the common people endure. How long could a kingdom built on such fragile foundations survive without cracking at its seams? This is the story of irreversible choices, of men who gambled their lives and legacies on the knife edge of history. The rise and fall of tyrants, the birth of dynasties, and the unending clash between power and principle. Follow the intricate dance of fate and fear that forged the Korea we know today. Subscribe to Quiet History for more stories where the past's darkest decisions echo through time. What price did the people of Goryeo pay to survive beneath the shadow of powerful neighbors? How did the fragile balance of power shape every decision, every step they took? And what consequences lurked behind the beauty of their renowned crafts? These questions echo through the corridors of history, where every choice was a gamble with fate. Farming was the backbone of Goryeo's economy, yet the land itself was a silent battlefield. Vast estates, owned by aristocrats and Buddhist monasteries, demanded a heavy toll. A significant portion of the harvest was claimed as taxes and rent. This relentless extraction bred resentment and hardship among the commoners, whose lives depended on the soil, but whose freedom was chained to the demands of the elite. It was a delicate, dangerous dance. One slip could unleash rebellion. But Koryo was not just a land of farmers. It thrived on craftsmanship and trade. The kingdom's artisans perfected the art of Celadon pottery, their masterpieces renowned far beyond their borders. Infused with crushed pale jade, the glaze shimmered with the ethereal hues of dawn after rain, a color so unique it mesmerized emperors in China and nobles in Japan alike. Yet behind each delicate vessel lay the toil of countless hands and the fragile threads of international admiration. How long could this beauty shield them from the storms brewing at their shores? Another silent revolution was brewing in the quiet, ink-stained halls of Koryo's workshops. Craftsmen developed durable paper from mulberry fibers, the very sheets that would carry knowledge through generations. By the 11th century, wooden printing blocks were carved with painstaking care, enabling mass production of Buddhist texts. The monumental Tripitaka Koreana, created in 1234, consisted of 81,000 wooden blocks, a testament to devotion and precision, surviving the ravages of time as a national treasure. But even this testament to faith and skill masked a fragile society wary of external threats. Koryo's foreign relations were a precarious tightrope. The kingdom bowed to Chinese suzerainty, sending envoys with tribute, gold, women, tiger skins, tokens of submission laced with desperation. In return, Koryo's merchants gained precious access to Chinese markets, and the aristocracy coveted luxury goods, books, and art. Yet this alliance was a double-edged sword. It tethered Koryo's sovereignty to the whims of a distant empire. To the east, a darker threat lurked. Japanese pirates, known as wako, ravaged Koryo's coasts with ruthless raids, plundering villages and taking captives. The kingdom responded with a network of watchtowers, fortresses, and a naval fleet, a desperate fortress against relentless waves of violence. These defenses were a lifeline, but also a reminder that peace was fragile, and every day could bring destruction. In the spiritual realm, Buddhism was not merely a faith, but a force entwined with power. Monasteries, exempt from taxes and wielding vast lands, stood as pillars of influence. Monks advised kings, shaped policies, and even raised future rulers. The royal family itself sometimes donned monastic robes, blurring lines between sacred and political authority. Yet, beneath this venerable alliance simmered tensions. The rise of Neo-Confucianism threatened to unravel centuries of balance, casting shadows of ideological strife that would soon engulf the kingdom. Confucian ideals held sway in government, instilling ethics, education, and order within the bureaucracy. Many Koreans lived dual lives, devout Buddhists in private faith, Confucians in public service, a delicate harmony that masked deeper fractures. As the century waned, the fragile truce between these world views began to crack, heralding a new era of conflict and transformation. Culturally, Koryo was a tapestry woven from native traditions and Chinese influence. The educated elite composed poetry and essays in classical Chinese, emulating the grandeur of their powerful neighbor. Meanwhile, folk tales and oral stories thrived quietly in the native tongue, rarely committed to paper, because Chinese characters faltered at capturing Korean sounds. This cultural dichotomy mirrored the kingdom's internal struggle between preservation and adaptation. between past and uncertain future. Architecturally, Koryo's wooden palaces and temples rose on sturdy stone bases, their sweeping tiled roofs curving skyward like silent prayers. Borrowing innovations from Song China, these structures symbolized both strength and vulnerability. Yet, time has not been kind. The wooden skeletons of that era have mostly vanished, lost to fires, wars, and decay. What remains is only a fragile echo of a world where every decision carved the fate of a nation caught between glory and ruin. In the crucible of Koryo's history, choices were never simple, and consequences never reversible. The delicate balance of power, faith, and culture shaped a kingdom teetering on the edge of survival. Every tribute sent, every fortress built, every prayer carved into wood was a step into the unknown, a gamble with destiny that would define the legacy of Koryo forever. If you want to uncover more stories where history's most fateful decisions changed everything, subscribe to Quiet History. What forces could shape a kingdom's fate so profoundly that every decision echoed through centuries? How did King Sejong the Great's vision overturn a rigid world of silence? And what price did Korea pay for its strict adherence to Confucian order? The story of Joseon is not just history. It's a battlefield of ideas, power, and human frailty. The stakes? Absolute control balanced on a razor's edge. The Joseon dynasty, rising in the early 15th century, was forged under the iron grip of Neo-Confucianism, a doctrine reshaping society with unforgiving precision. King Sejong the Great, ruling with absolute power yet bound by Confucian ethics, spearheaded a revolutionary transformation. But this was no free rein. His authority was constantly scrutinized by a tripartite system of checks: the State Council, Inspection Bureau, and Censorship Office, creating a tense, fragile equilibrium where even the monarch's choices could be challenged as immoral or unlawful. This unprecedented system of accountability was both a safeguard and a snare, trapping leaders in a web of ethical constraints. But what was Neo-Confucianism? Born from the 12th century Chinese philosopher Zhu Xi's synthesis, it fused Confucian ethics with Taoist metaphysics and Buddhist logic, demanding not only governance but spiritual self-mastery. It was a rigid doctrine that glorified education and social hierarchy, demanding unwavering loyalty to family and class. To follow it was to accept a life predetermined by birth, with the Yangban aristocrats ruling supreme, and the Chonmin, the lowest caste of slaves and outcasts, condemned to the shadows. The question hung in the air: could a society so stratified endure the winds of change without shattering? Amid this rigid structure, Joseon's economy thrived on rice farming, an agricultural lifeline irrigated by rivers and mountain springs. Peasants toiled endlessly on their own and state lands, surrendering much of their harvest in taxes and rents. Meanwhile, crafts and trade simmered under suspicion, their practitioners scorned by Neo-Confucian disdain. Yet, beneath this surface of order, tensions brewed, economic pressures mounting with every harvest taken, every grain taxed. The kingdom balanced precariously between harmony and upheaval. Externally, Joseon's diplomacy was a game of survival and submission. The kingdom pledged allegiance to the Ming dynasty, securing protection and cultural exchange in return for tribute, a calculated gamble that preserved peace but sacrificed autonomy. Conversely, relentless Japanese pirate raids gnawed at Korea's coasts, perpetuating fear and hostility. Each foreign encounter tested Joseon's resolve, demanding decisions that could either shield or shatter the fragile state. Yet none of these challenges overshadowed the monumental leap that would define Joseon, the creation of Hangul in 1443. Prior to this, Korean writing relied exclusively on Chinese characters, restricting literacy to the elite and perpetuating social divides. King Sejong assembled a team of scholars to craft a new phonetic alphabet, simple, logical, and revolutionary. Every character mirrored the shape of the mouth producing its sound, turning language into a living, accessible tool. This was no mere convenience. It was an act of defiance against centuries of elitism, a bold gamble to empower the common people. But with progress came peril. The entrenched Yangban class resisted this democratization of knowledge, fearing loss of status and control. The introduction of Hangul threatened to unravel the very fabric of Joseon's strict social order, challenging centuries of power and privilege. Each letter carved into parchment was a spark against the looming darkness of repression, an irreversible choice that would echo through generations. The kingdom stood at a crossroads: cling to tradition or embrace transformation. And so Joseon marched onward, a realm governed by fatal decisions, where kings wielded absolute power shackled by ethics, where knowledge was both weapon and threat, where every choice bore consequences as enduring as the mountains and rivers shaping the land itself. The legacy of Joseon is a testament to human fear and courage in the face of irreversible change. What would you have done, trapped between duty and destiny? The past whispers its answer, but the future remains unwritten. If you found this journey through Joseon's turbulent history compelling, subscribe to Quiet History for more stories where every decision shapes the fate of nations. What happens when a king dares to rewrite the very sounds of his people? King Sejong the Great faced this exact challenge in the early 15th century. Chinese characters, foreign and complex, failed to capture the nuances of Korean speech. Common folk, desperate to express themselves, found their thoughts trapped and silenced. Was there a way to break free from this linguistic prison? With fierce compassion burning inside him, Sejong declared the creation of a new alphabet, a set of 28 letters designed to be simple, accessible, and perfectly suited to the Korean tongue. He announced it in a royal document called the Hunmin Jeongeum, promising a revolution in communication. But even brilliance can be met with suspicion. Could this new script truly change the course of a nation, or would it be crushed by tradition? The answer came in the form of fierce resistance. The conservative Yangban elite, proud of their command over classical Chinese writing, dismissed Sejong's invention as vulgar and unworthy. Official documents and scholarly works clung stubbornly to Chinese characters, shutting out the new alphabet. Meanwhile, Hangul found refuge only among women, barred from formal education, and the lower classes struggling to be heard. The king's vision was stifled, his gift almost lost to history. For centuries, the alphabet simmered beneath the surface, a silent rebellion penned in ink. It wasn't until the 20th century that Hangul finally emerged as the core of Korean written identity, transforming the very fabric of literacy and culture. But Sejong's era was not only about letters. His reign from 1418 to 1450 was a whirlwind of scientific and technological breakthroughs that reshaped Korean society's understanding of the world and its place within it. Imagine a kingdom where rainfall was measured with unprecedented precision, where water clocks ticked with newfound accuracy, and the stars themselves were charted using innovations borrowed from Chinese and Arab knowledge. In 1434, Korean astronomers composed the Chiljeong-san, a set of astronomical tables that would guide generations, and in the same breath, Korea refined printing technology with bronze movable type, a craft that allowed knowledge to spread beyond the elite. The year 1443 marked a pivotal moment, the casting of the Gyeongjado typeface. Books on philosophy, medicine, history, and science poured forth, printed with a reverence that echoed the kingdom's thirst for enlightenment. Yet despite this cultural flowering, traditional Confucian literature written in classical Chinese still dominated the halls of power and learning. How long could this delicate balance between old and new endure? Hangul began to infiltrate the margins, giving voice to stories once silenced, romances, adventures, social conflicts, told in a language the people could finally grasp. The art of the Choson dynasty followed, echoing Confucian ideals of restraint and harmony. Monochrome landscapes painted in ink on silk offered glimpses of a world both grand and intimate, where nature dwarfed humanity. Yet beneath this serene surface, a storm was gathering. The peace and progress of Choson were shattered at the end of the 16th century by an unstoppable force, the Japanese invasion led by Toyotomi Hideyoshi. After unifying Japan through decades of brutal warfare, Hideyoshi set his sights on Korea as the gateway to conquering China. In the year 1592, a massive army of 160,000 soldiers landed on Korean shores, advancing rapidly, overwhelming an unprepared and corrupt military. Seoul fell within weeks, the heart of the kingdom seized by invaders. King Seonjo fled north to the borderlands, desperation driving him to seek aid from the Ming Emperor of China. The fate of Korea hung in the balance, a nation torn by the consequences of complacency and the ruthless ambitions of conquest. Could the kingdom survive this cataclysm, or was it doomed to be swallowed by history's unforgiving tides? Subscribe to Quiet History to uncover the next chapter in this epic struggle, where human fear, fateful decisions, and the will to endure collide. What happens when a kingdom chooses isolation over the uncertain tides of change? How far can tradition protect a nation against the relentless forces of foreign ambition and modernity? This is the story of Korea, a kingdom clinging to its ancient ways while the world outside its borders was exploding in conflict and transformation. In the 18th and 19th centuries, Korea remained a hermit kingdom, deliberately sealing itself off from foreign influence. Only official embassies from China, and rarely Japan, were permitted entry. Missionaries and European traders who dared to enter were not welcomed. They were expelled or even executed. This strict isolation was born from bitter memories of past invasions and the unyielding grip of a conservative Confucian ruling elite. Yet the outside world was closing in, and the pressure would soon become unbearable. In 1866, the American merchant ship General Sherman attempted to penetrate deep into Korea via the Taedong River. The Koreans responded by burning the ship and its crew alive. This brutal act ignited a spark that would ripple through international relations and provoke a punitive American expedition the following year. The walls Korea had built around itself were beginning to crumble under the weight of foreign aggression. Inside Korea, a fierce battle unfolded, not just against external threats, but within its own court. The regent Daewon-gun sought to strengthen central authority and the military while resisting radical reforms or opening the kingdom to foreigners. The fragile peace was a mask over growing tensions between isolationists and reformers who looked to Japan's rapid modernization as a model. This internal struggle was as perilous as the foreign pressures bearing down on the peninsula. The turning point came in 1876 with the signing of the unequal Treaty of Ganghwa with Japan. For the first time, Korea opened several ports to Japanese trade and declared independence from China, shattering centuries of suzerainty. This set off a domino effect, with similar treaties forced upon Korea by the United States, Britain, Germany, Russia, and other Western powers. The gates were flung open, and a storm was unleashed. The consequences were devastating. Traditional crafts and home industries collapsed under the onslaught of cheap foreign goods. Foreign merchants and missionaries flooded into previously closed regions, bringing with them revolutionary ideas, from Christianity to social Darwinism and liberalism, that shook the foundations of Korean society. The old world order teetered on the brink of collapse. In this chaos, nationalist and reformist movements surged forward, believing that only modernization and reform could save the nation's independence from foreign domination. In 1882, a group of progressive officers and officials led by Kim Ok-gyun launched a coup to establish a pro-Western reform government. But their uprising was crushed by Chinese troops, and the leaders fled to Japan, marking a painful defeat for Korea's reformist dreams. Korea became an arena for a deadly contest of empires. China, Korea's traditional overlord, fought to maintain its influence through conservative factions at the court. Japan, having transformed itself through the Meiji Restoration, backed Korean reformers while aggressively expanding its economic and military presence. Russia, expanding into the Far East, eyed Korea's northern territories bordering its Primorsky region with increasing interest. The peninsula was a prize that could not be ignored. This fierce rivalry exploded into the First Sino-Japanese War of 1894 to 1895. Japan decisively crushed China and forced it to sign the Treaty of Shimonoseki, which recognized Korea's complete independence, yet in truth, this was merely the prelude to Japan's tightening grip. Korea stood at the crossroads, its fate hanging in the balance as the giants of East Asia clashed for dominance. Subscribe to Quiet History to uncover the stories behind the shadows of history, where every choice carries the weight of a nation's future. What does it mean when centuries-old sovereignty crumbles under foreign pressure? When Japan forced China to cede Taiwan and the Liaodong Peninsula, it signaled the collapse of Chinese dominance and the rise of a new power in East Asia. But this triumph was short-lived. International forces, led by Russia, Germany, and France, pressured Japan to return the Liaodong Peninsula to China. This humiliating reversal unleashed a storm of fury and resentment within Japanese society and government alike. Was this the beginning of an insatiable hunger for dominance, or the spark that would ignite future conflict? In the heart of Korea, the aftermath of the Sino-Japanese War, shook the very foundations of its feudal society. The so-called Gabo reforms tore down the old class system, outlawed slavery, and restructured government and education along Western lines. Yet these changes, forced under foreign duress, deepened fractures within Korean society. The common people, burdened by economic hardship and foreign interference, resisted bitterly. How do you modernize a nation when its soul resists the very hands that try to shape it? Amid this turmoil, a powerful nationalist movement surged, the Donghak, or Eastern Learning, blending Confucianism, Buddhism, Taoism, and even Christianity, with a fierce call for social justice and anti-foreign resistance. The Donghak Rebellion of 1894 erupted as a desperate cry against corrupt officials and foreign domination. Though the uprising was crushed, it exposed the raw wounds of a society torn apart and became a grim prelude to the war that would engulf the Korean Peninsula. Could such unrest be contained, or was war inevitable? Japan's victory over China did not end the struggle for Korea. Russia emerged as the next great rival, casting a long shadow over East Asia. The competition for control escalated into the Russo-Japanese War of 1904 to 1905, a brutal clash ending with Russia's humiliating defeat. The Treaty of Portsmouth forced Russia to acknowledge Japan's dominant interests in Korea. But what price would Korea pay for being the prize in this deadly game of empires? Seizing the moment, Japan imposed a protectorate over Korea in 1905, stripping the nation of its sovereignty. The Korean army was disbanded, and foreign policy handed to the Japanese resident. The forced abdication of King Kojong in 1907, replaced by his son Sunjong, marked a final blow to Korean autonomy. Then, on August 22, 1910, Japan formally annexed Korea, ending the 5-century reign of the Joseon dynasty and erasing the Korean state from the map. Did the world witness the death of a nation or the birth of a new conflict? The 35 years of Japanese colonial rule, from 1910 to 1945, became one of the darkest chapters in Korean history. Japan pursued aggressive assimilation, outlawing the Korean language in schools and public spaces, forcing Koreans to adopt Japanese names, practice Shintoism, and swear loyalty to the emperor. Land seizures displaced countless Korean farmers, feeding a colonial economy designed to supply Japan's industrial machine. Desperation drove many Koreans to flee to Manchuria, Japan, the United States, and beyond, searching for survival. But how long could the spirit of a people endure such erasure? Yet, even in oppression, modernization pressed onward. Japanese-built railroads, factories, power plants, and schools transformed Korea's landscape, though always with the aim of erasing its identity. By the end of the colonial era, Korea was among Asia's most industrially advanced nations, but most enterprises were Japanese-owned and served imperial ambitions. The paradox was bitter, progress shadowed by subjugation. Could technological advancement ever justify the loss of freedom? Korea was not a passive victim. From the outset, resistance surged in multiple forms: armed guerrilla warfare, underground patriot groups, student protests, and cultural societies dedicated to preserving Korean identity. The mass peaceful demonstrations of the March First movement in 1919 became a pivotal moment, shining a light on the unbreakable Korean will despite overwhelming odds. Could a colonized people reclaim their nation through unity and courage, or was their fate sealed by global power struggles? This was a saga of fateful decisions, from empires clashing over territory to a people struggling to hold on to their heritage amid waves of forced change. Each choice carved a path deeper into conflict, resistance, and tragedy. The echoes of these events still resonate today. Want to delve deeper into the hidden stories behind these dramatic turns? Subscribe to Quiet History and stay with us as we unravel the untold chapters of our shared past. What if the fight for freedom turned into a brutal nightmare? What happens when a nation's hope is crushed under the iron fist of an occupying power? After decades of Japanese rule, Korea's desperate call for independence erupted violently across cities and villages, with people waving national flags and loudly proclaiming a declaration of independence. But this fragile hope soon collided with a far grimmer reality as new global powers circled the peninsula like vultures. In the shadow of the Cold War's onset, Korea was cruelly divided, not by its own will, but by the designs of superpowers. The Soviet military established a pro-communist government in the north, led by Kim Il-sung, a hardened anti-Japanese guerrilla from Manchuria. Meanwhile, in the south, American forces backed Lee Sing-man, a leader with close ties to Washington, heading a temporary government in exile. Could these two imposed regimes ever hope to unite a single Korea? The answer was a resounding no. Between 1946 and 1947, desperate attempts to forge a unified government were crushed by ideological chasms and escalating East-West tensions. By 1948, the peninsula had shattered into two bitter rivals: the Republic of Korea in the south, with Seoul as its capital, and the Democratic People's Republic of Korea in the north, with Pyongyang as its seat of power. Each claimed to be the one true Korean government, each refusing to recognize the other's legitimacy. The stage was set for catastrophe. The inevitable exploded into full-scale war on June 25, 1950. North Korean troops surged across the 38th parallel, launching a lightning offensive that overwhelmed the south, except for a small pocket around the port of Pusan. International outrage was immediate, but so too was international calculation. The United Nations Security Council, exploiting the Soviet boycott over China's membership dispute, approved a military response led by the United States. This was no longer just a Korean war. It was a global showdown. In September 1950, United Nations forces, predominantly American, executed a daring amphibious landing at Incheon, striking deep behind enemy lines and flipping the war's momentum. By October, they had crushed North Korean resistance almost to the Chinese border along the Yalu River. But victory was fleeting. China, fearing invasion and the collapse of its buffer state, intervened with massive volunteer armies. The tide turned again, this time against the UN forces. The brutal back-and-forth violence stabilized by early 1951 along the same 38th parallel that had sparked the war. For 2 more years, endless battles raged with no decisive breakthrough. Then, in 1953, an armistice finally froze the conflict in place, but at a staggering human cost. 3 million lives were lost, mostly civilians caught in the crossfire, and millions of families were torn apart by the heavily fortified, demilitarized zone that divided the peninsula. War had not only destroyed lives and cities, but had deepened the ideological abyss between North and South Korea. This rupture hardened into a permanent division, a scar on the world map and in the hearts of Koreans everywhere, a division that persists to this day. The post-war paths of these two Koreas diverged sharply, shaped by the war's brutal legacy and their opposing backers. North Korea, under Kim Il-sung's iron grip, forged a Stalinist socialist state. It embraced a planned economy, collective farming, and a cult of personality around its leader. In the 60s, the regime formalized the Juche ideology, emphasizing self-reliance and national independence. Initially, North Korea's economy thrived, propped up by Soviet, Chinese, and other socialist allies. Military industry flourished, heavy industry expanded, and massive infrastructure projects reshaped the country. But just as the North built its fortress, cracks began to show. By the 70s, economic growth slowed dramatically. Then, in 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed, shattering the lifeline of support from Moscow. With their primary benefactor gone, North Korea plunged into economic crisis, its future uncertain and perilous. Every decision from here on would carry the weight of survival or destruction. The Korean War and its aftermath remain a haunting saga of irrevocable choices and terrible consequences. The questions it raises about power, ideology, and the human cost of division resonate through history. If you want to explore more stories of humanity caught in the relentless tide of history, subscribe to Quiet History. What happens when a nation's legacy turns into a burden? When the death of a towering figure like Kim Il-sung in 1994 doesn't just mark an end, but ignites a chain of irreversible decisions. North Korea plunged deeper into economic despair, shackled by the rigid grip of its political system. Power didn't shift by choice, but by bloodline, passing like a dark torch from father to son, Kim Jong-il, and then to his son, Kim Jong-un. Yet this hereditary succession only tightened the grip of isolation, turning the country into one of the most secretive and censored places on earth, where every movement and every contact with the outside world was a risk, a potential betrayal. But what price does a nation pay for such control? Meanwhile, South Korea's story was no less turbulent. After the brutal scars of the Korean War, it fell under the shadow of authoritarian rule, beginning with President Syngman Rhee's tenuous grip from 1948 to 1960. The military coup of 1960 launched General Park Chung-hee into power, a man whose iron fist crushed opposition with ruthless efficiency. But beneath that oppression lay the seeds of a miracle, an economic transformation that would shock the world. Park's regime engineered a tightly controlled economy, channeling resources into giant conglomerates known as chaebols, shaping South Korea into an export powerhouse. From simple textiles and toys to cars, ships, and cutting-edge technology, the nation surged forward. Yet, the cost? A suppression of freedoms so severe it sparked a powder keg beneath the surface. Could such a fragile balance last? The people's fury was inevitable. Student protests erupted, workers struck, and activists from all corners of society demanded change. After Park's assassination in 1979, the reins fell into the hands of General Chun Do-hwan, whose regime responded with brutal force. The massacre in Gwangju in May 1980 where hundreds, possibly thousands, of innocent protesters were slaughtered by government troops, exposed the regime's true nature. But even this horror couldn't silence the growing cry for democracy. By 1987, mass protests forced Chun to concede to direct presidential elections, a pivotal moment in South Korea's tortured path to freedom. Yet, even as elections brought new faces, the shadows of military rule lingered. The fight for democracy was far from over. The election of Roh Tae-woo, another former general, marked a complex transition between the old order and a fledgling democracy. But it was the rise of civilian leaders like Kim Young-sam and Kim Dae-jung in the 1990s that truly reshaped South Korea's destiny. These men, born from the opposition, steered the country toward openness and reform. Kim Dae-jung's Sunshine Policy in the late 1990s dared to imagine a different future, one where economic cooperation and dialogue with the North could mend decades of division. His historic visit to Pyongyang in 2001, meeting Kim Jong-il face-to-face, seemed to promise a thaw in one of the Cold War's last frozen conflicts. For these efforts, Kim Dae-jung was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. But could peace ever be more than a fragile illusion? North Korea's defiance shattered those hopes. The country's relentless pursuit of nuclear weapons culminated in its first nuclear test in 2006, sending shockwaves through the global order. What began as cautious dialogue spiraled into cycles of provocation and confrontation. Each missile launch echoed like a grim reminder. The peninsula remained a powder keg where diplomacy and threats danced dangerously close. Meanwhile, the technological chasm between the two Koreas widened into a canyon. South Korea surged into the 21st century as a global economic titan, leading in semiconductors, smartphones, automobiles, and shipbuilding. Its culture, K-pop, TV dramas, spread worldwide, a soft power that captivated millions. Yet, just beyond the horizon, the specter of division and fear persisted. What is the cost of division? Of leadership forged in secrecy and fear? Of decisions made in shadows that echo through generations? The Korean Peninsula's story is a relentless tide of hope and despair, progress and repression, where every victory carries the weight of sacrifice. As we watch these intertwined fates, we must ask, can the cycle ever be broken? Or are the choices made decades ago sealing a future none can escape? If you want to dive deeper into the intricate struggles and dramatic turns of history, subscribe to Quiet History and join us as we uncover the untold truths behind the moments that shape our world. What determines the fate of a nation? Is it geography, military might, or the sheer power of its economy? Or could it be something far more intangible, something that survives wars, divisions, and catastrophes? Nowhere is this question more urgent than on the Korean Peninsula, where every choice echoes across generations. North Korea stands as one of the poorest and most isolated countries in the modern world, a nation shackled by crippling sanctions and a failing economy. Its scarce resources funnel relentlessly into military ambitions and a secretive nuclear program, while millions suffer in silent poverty. This reckless gamble tightens the noose of international isolation, bringing the entire world to the edge of uncertainty. Just across the border, South Korea tells a strikingly different story. It has emerged as a global cultural powerhouse. Its music, films, television dramas, cuisine, and fashion weaving deeply into the fabric of global culture. But this dazzling ascent was not born from chance. It is the careful orchestration of centuries of survival and resilience. South Korean giants like Samsung, Hyundai, and LG dominate the technology landscape, while artists, writers, and filmmakers command international acclaim and prestigious awards. This is the story of a people who have faced invasions, colonial rule, and devastating wars, and yet have risen, time and again, from the ashes of destruction to claim their place on the world stage. The specter of nuclear conflict on the Korean Peninsula hangs as a constant threat, unsettling the entire international community. Every decision made in Pyongyang or Seoul carries irreversible consequences, decisions that could ignite global chaos or open doors to peace. The stakes have never been higher. Yet beneath the shadows of fear and division, there is a deep-rooted hope. The Korean people's history is a testament to the extraordinary resilience of the human spirit, its capacity to endure unimaginable hardship and emerge stronger. This story is not just about war and politics. It is about survival, creativity, and the relentless pursuit of identity. Ultimately, the Korean saga teaches a profound lesson. No matter the size of a nation, no matter its geographic constraints or military power, the true measure of its destiny lies in cultural endurance, adaptability, and the power to innovate. This is the legacy Korea offers to the world, a lesson in hope forged from the crucible of fate. Stay with Quiet History as we unravel the tense, dramatic story of a divided peninsula and a people who refuse to be defined by their past. Subscribe and join us as we explore the choices that shape not only Korea, but the future of humanity itself.